everything!
So in 2006, a website called GameTrailers.com asked a very simple question. What are the top 10 best and worst video games of all time?
And we're here to deliver your choices for the top 10 best and worst video games of all time.
Yeah, I just said that. Votes came flooding in, and through pure happenstance, I would catch the results show later that year. I was around 14 at the time, and being the impressionable young teenager that I was, I took this list as gospel. And one of the entries that stood out the most to me was placed firmly on that countdown at number 6.
Number 6 best.
So, I didn't have a PlayStation 1 growing up, but I was plenty familiar with Final Fantasy. Or so I thought. Around 2002, my brother and I had just completed our first playthrough of Final Fantasy X. So to hear that 7 was considered not only one of the best in the franchise, but one of the greatest video games of all time,
I need it!
So about a year later, I'd get my first job, department store. Please be nice to us, we're dying inside. And with that, a crappy paycheck. And with that, I was given the opportunity to hunt down this fairly elusive game. So let's get one thing straight. These PS1 classics on your PlayStation 3, yeah, they weren't exactly a thing. No, I had to search for a physical copy. And let me tell you, this thing was like the holy f***ing grail. For several months, I couldn't find it anywhere. But then, at a used game store right near where I worked, I finally tracked it down. For 75 bucks.
Shut up and take my money!
I played FF7 for weeks on my PlayStation 2 before it froze.
Well, that's great. That's just f***ing great, man. Now what the f*** are we supposed to do?
So, a few years later, I purchased it online for my PlayStation 3. I got a little further this time, but ended up hitting a pretty huge boss-sized roadblock. Plus, Uncharted 2 was coming out and I just sort of forgot about it for almost a decade. Well, wouldn't you know it, Square Enix announced a remake of the titular game in 2015. So there I was, just trying to blend in with the rabid fanbase that had obviously completed this game 30 times over.
Good, huh?
Oh, good.
So, a few weeks back, I made room in my crazy-ass schedule, purchased the relatively new remastered version of the game on my PlayStation 4. For those counting at home, I have purchased this game 3 times, sat down, and knocked this thing out. And, sure enough,
It's fantastic.
Final Fantasy VII was considered a huge undertaking in terms of overall development, which combined with its marketing budget, amounted to roughly $80 million across a team of over 100 people. For reference, GoldenEye 007, released on the Nintendo 64 during that same year, had around 11 people on its main development team and cost roughly $2 million to develop. And I know that's a wildly unfair comparison in some respects, but the fact remains, Square knew this game was going to be a juggernaut. And with advertising efforts reaching overseas audiences with surprisingly consistent results, this thing turned into a global phenomenon. Suddenly, this spiky-haired, overcompensating soldier with no feet was popping up everywhere, and nobody knew what the f*** was going on.
The revolution has begun!
Anyway, that's enough of the history lesson, because today we're diving into why Final Fantasy VII is as popular as it is, why grown-ups the world over went absolutely nuts when that 2015 teaser trailer dropped. So, let's dive in. Final Fantasy VII starts off in the city of Midgar and places you into the role of Cloud Strife, a former soldier of the reviled Shinra organization, which is converting the life energy of the planet into electricity for its massive overcompensating city. A lot of overcompensating in this game. As a mercenary for hire, Cloud falls into the ranks of a group of freedom fighters called Avalanche, who have taken it upon themselves to destroy the reactors powering Midgar so that the planet doesn't end up waving the white flag. This scrappy group includes Barrett, a single father toting a gun arm who probably shouldn't be allowed anywhere near his 4-year-old daughter, these 3 people whose names just don't really matter all that much because they're gonna die pretty soon, and the absolute best character in the entire freaking game, Tifa Lockhart.
I catch a grenade, oh yeah.
Also, Aerith's here too. I gotta say though, this intro sequence is among the best I've ever played. The pacing, the slow trickle of exposition, and fantastic use of both long and short-term foreshadowing, the bombing run is near flawless. And at this point, you're probably asking yourself, hey, who put these cardboard boxes on my beautiful matte painting? So here's the thing. Shut up. I'm not gonna try to defend this game's presentation well over 2 decades since it was released, but what I will say is that you kinda get used to it. Honestly, the one thing I really do like about the character models is how expressive they are. There's something kind of charming about how each character moves and reacts to specific situations. It's nothing too impressive, but with the exception of some incredibly well-produced FMV scenes that show up every now and then throughout the main story arc, as well as a few awesome backgrounds, there's not too much to the overall presentation here. I even found some of the monster designs to be a bit lacking. Like, does anybody really remember what the f these things are? I mean, I guess you get to fight a giant robot monster house at one point.
So there's that.
FF7 touts the active time battle system. Essentially, each character has an ATB gauge that determines when they're allowed to act, giving you time to determine what action you'd like them to take, be it attacking, casting a spell, or engaging in a 30-minute long summon animation. All of this is bound to the game's materia system, which not only has its ties in the story as crystallized planet energy, but definitely leads to some incredibly robust character customization opportunities. For me, coming off of Final Fantasy X, where you have your dedicated summoner, damage dealer, black mage, drug dealer, 7's materia allows you to actively apply spells, summons, and passive buffs to whichever characters you'd like, provided their selected weapon has enough slots to hold them. Never thought I'd see Cloud holding a baseball bat, but here we are. This is just a thing now. Add to that high damage dealing techniques called limit breaks that grow and change as you continue to level up and modify your team, and you've got yourself a battle system. One that starts off fairly simple, but grows in complexity as you make your way through the world. And speaking of, it isn't long before FF7 sets you out on that open road, allowing Cloud and his merry band of misfits to visit towns, purchase new gear, ride giant chickens, dance with giant chickens. Honestly, I found this Midgar-less, travel-heavy tone to be a bit surprising. You see, the game puts a lot of time into explaining how this whole floating city thing works, how those living underneath these giant plates never actually get to see the sun, and how stringent the Shinra company can be when it comes to its security efforts, but nope. Dancing chickens. I'm not letting this go. It's not necessarily a bad choice, and you do end up getting to return to Midgar near the endgame, but I think there's more here that could have been explored. And to me, it feels like a bit of a missed opportunity. I do like how the land around it is like cracked and dying though. That's a nice touch. So as soon as you and your ragtag group of survivors make it out of the city via a sick Terminator 2 bike chase, Cloud informs them of Final Fantasy VII's primary antagonist, Sephiroth. Nope, not yet. We'll get there though. Sephiroth is built up perfectly. Seen as Cloud's inspiration for becoming a soldier, striking down colossal enemies with a single hit, and even completely decimating entire villages upon realizing he's destined for something greater. You'll encounter him often throughout your adventures, and if there's one thing that FF7 does extraordinarily well, it's keeping the action and exploration in between these moments meaningful and engaging. I'd say that overall the experience is fairly well paced, but more importantly, incredibly diverse as far as locations and side activities are concerned. Each location feels unique in its style and presentation, and it's clear that the developers wanted to make sure that you wouldn't just be running around picking fights. There are mini games practically everywhere, prompting you to engage in squatting competitions, tower defense, gambling on chicken races. It's nuts. You'll be traveling with your crew and then boom, free CPR lesson, and it's like, yes, let's do this. Travel a bit more, lose your girlfriend to gang violence, and bam, now you're tackling the slopes like
Ricky Winterbourne.
Okay, yeah, I kinda skipped over something pretty big there. Bring down the lights, time to get serious. So throughout the game, both Aerith and Tifa act as not only capable partners, but as two potential love interests for Cloud. And you'll occasionally be thrown an optional dialogue choice to sort of steer his affections one way or the other. On my very first playthrough, Aerith was my girl. But in the end, her fate is ultimately sealed. Often defined as one of the most heartbreaking scenes in video game history, Aerith's death represents an undeniable tonal shift in a story that, until now, was never this personal. To be clear, killing off a main character in a video game wasn't necessarily a new concept at this time. Hell, it wasn't even new for Final Fantasy. But I believe the franchise's move to 3 dimensions gives this moment significantly more weight. You get to see the reactions. You understand why this hurts. Remember those little expressive movements we talked about earlier? Yeah, they're in full force here. You know exactly what these characters are going through, and to be honest, it's unfortunate that most people know this is going to happen even without playing a single minute of the game. That just goes to show you how deftly this scene is executed, and how impactful it really is. Said Final Fantasy VII director Yoshinori Kitase, "In the real world, things are very different. You just need to look around you. Death comes suddenly, and there's no notion of good or bad. It leaves not a dramatic feeling, but great emptiness. When you lose someone you loved very much, you feel this big empty space and think, if I had known this was coming, I would have done things differently." These are the feelings I wanted to arouse in the players with Aerith's death. Feelings of reality, not Hollywood. As I said, I didn't necessarily grow up with this game. It had next to nothing to do with my childhood. So why the soundtrack strikes a particularly nostalgic chord in me, I guess I'll never know. Now, there are very few games out there that I would consider to have a perfect soundtrack. Hell, I don't even know what the criteria would be for that kind of list, but Final Fantasy VII is most definitely on it. Each track has an unwavering sense of confidence about it, like there was never any doubt how and where each and every note would be placed. Now that probably sounds a bit overdramatic, but Nobuo Uematsu was essentially able to create one unforgettable track after another with an incredibly limited toolset, his emotion on full display. And it's kinda one of the best things ever. Specifically, tracks related to Sephiroth take on a sinister, foreboding nature, and prove to be some of the most memorable in the game, if not the entire franchise. And trust me, that's saying something. Armed with a black materia, his plan involves ramming a meteor into the planet in order to manipulate the latter's life stream following the impact. The latter half of your adventure involves you attempting to negate this process, while dealing with all sorts of plot twists and turns that eventually amount to a pretty fascinating conclusion. And one of the most intense final boss battles in the history of the industry. The fight against Sephiroth is quite literally heart-pounding, and that's primarily due to what is considered to be Uematsu's magnum opus. So, real talk, I actually got to see this performed live, and it was one of the highlights of my entire goddamn life. However, the remastered version of Final Fantasy VII comes at a cost, because while it is one of the best ways to play this game in my humble opinion, there's one caveat, and that's the ability to instantly heal your characters and max out their limit breaks mid-battle. But before I get to that, there are 2 other extra features available here, and both of them are seamlessly integrated into the overall package. The first is the most useful, a 3x speed multiplier affecting nearly every aspect of the game. You'll move quicker, fight faster, and generally speed through sections that can feel a bit drawn out otherwise. Because despite being a phenomenal experience from beginning to end, 7 is very much a product of the times. It does feel slow in terms of navigation and battle speed, especially when your entire party is transformed into sleeping frogs and just... What the f*** am I supposed to do about this? It cuts down on summon times as well, which despite being your most powerful attacks, feel like they need a goddamn intermission before landing. Feel free free to grab some popcorn and a drink on your way back to the theater. Because f me, I don't know, is this even worth it? You be the judge. Now, the second edition, which I used more sparingly, prevents random encounters during travel, which is the primary way you level up and gain access to more powerful abilities. And again, I think this fits. Suddenly having a fight pop up out of nowhere while you're trying to explore a large area is a solid punch to the crotch.
The whistles got woo!
But that being said, that final modification, just instantly maxing out your characters, is a bit of a double-edged sword. On one hand, I'd say it prevents a lot of backtracking and spell management to keep your characters topped off, and that allows for easier grinding and a more fluid experience as far as pacing is concerned. However, much like the Arkham franchise's detective mode, it's just too easy to rely on. I feel as though an autosave feature, or perhaps an option saying, hey, you died, but you know, that's cool. You want to go back to the beginning of the fight and try again? I think that would have made more sense to me. But you know, in the end, all of these modifications allowed me to complete what I consider to be one of the greatest video game experiences I've ever had. And those seem to be few and far between these days. You know, it's pretty fascinating. Over 2 decades later, Final Fantasy VII manages to deliver a story that will continue to be relevant years from now. It lays down solid foundations for characters whose struggles you can actively feel. And the fact of the matter is, 7 feels top quality no matter how you slice it. Everything's just woven together in such a way that, at times, it's able to transcend its own genre. You look at something like Ocarina of Time, and you can see how a sequel could make it almost completely irrelevant, in terms of game design, in terms of story. And you know, it's kinda hard to see something similar happening with Final Fantasy VII.